Okay, so we're up to 92, and like I said, this one's pretty underrated, and it's one that I really really like for the same reason that I like a lot of his other films, and this one is Innocent Blood, which was directed by John Landis. Same. The weird thing about this movie is, to me, it's the same type of film as American Werewolf in London. It's except instead of werewolves, they use vampires, or more specifically, a really attractive French vampire. And this is weird because this was 92, and she's kind of taken an oath in this film. She lives in, I believe, New York, and she's taken an oath that she won't feed off of innocent people. She'll only feed off of bad people or scumbags or people that she deems as that. And so it turns out that her primary feeding source is the mob. And so she meets Robert Loggia, who's like this head of this mob cartel, ends up feeding off him, turns him into a vampire. And meanwhile, Anthony Garcia is the cop in the film that's trying to take down this syndicate, and he gets tangled up with her, but she doesn't want to bite him, and so they're all kind of fighting. Like, him and her team up, and they're fighting the mob basically, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's funny. Robert Loggia is fucking hysterical in it when he turns into a vampire, and he's like going around. I think, what's the guy's name? Oh, jeez. He turns the one guy that's like the insult comic. And shit. I'm guessing that's Don Rickles, yeah. And he turns Don Rickles into a vampire. And I'm guessing that's where Landis met Rickles, because he would go on to do a documentary of Don Rickles and his work. And it's a really it's the only the type of movie that Landis can make where it's like a comedic horror film, but when it's a horror film, it's really scary, and when it's a comedy, it's really funny. It never gets confused and tries to mesh the two together where it's neither one. Like Vampire in Brooklyn, that's another story for another day, but that's a perfect example of somebody where the film's not scary, it's not funny, it's just shit. It's like they tried to combine the two, and that's what happens. You get shit when you try to combine the two. But that's a really good one, though. So same year, 1992, Bram Stoker's Dracula came out. That was Francis Ford Coppola. I don't have that DVD. I kind of like that movie, even though it's one of those movies where I've seen it so many times that I just don't feel the need to own it. A lot of people think it's as close to the book as any film has gotten about Dracula and all this stuff. I like Winona Ryder's really great in it. I always like Anthony Hopkins, and Gary Oldman is probably the best thing about that film as Dracula. And it was really like, it took that weird era of the 70s where there was like vampire lesbian movies, which there's still a ton of, but back then that was like the beginning of erotic vampire films. It took that, like, added a bunch of production value and a bunch of gore, and that's really what you got. I mean, it was essentially like one of those erotic vampires. I mean, there's scenes in that movie that if you're not careful, you'll bust a nut on. I mean, shit just comes out of nowhere, like the campfire scene, or not the campfire, like there's like a bonfire scene with it. It's fine. So it's a very stylistic movie, though. It's everything Coppola does is. So that was kind of a good turn there. So you go from 92. Next one that I really think had any kind of impact was 94, and I don't have this one either, but Anne Rice's book Interview with a Vampire came out, and this is really the beginning of the homoerotic vampire film. where you got Tom Cruise and you got Brad Pitt, and oh man, they're just gaying it up. I mean, they're just fucking aristocratic, just, you know, with the poofy white George Washington wigs and going to balls and stuff like that, and whatever. It's, you know, 1800s, I don't know what it is. But it's not that bad, really. I mean, I know, like, it gets shit on a lot, but it's not. I mean, Brad Pitt's good in it, and Tom Cruise is actually good in it, and Kirsten Dunst is really good in it. She's the child vampire, and I like the twist towards the end. It's just, it started something that still continues to this day, and that a lot of people that really like films about vampires really despise, which is that concept of these kind of feminine, pretentious vampires. And there's really two ways you can go with a vampire film. You can have them be animalistic, or you can have them be human. But this one's like, they're human, but they're like really metro. So, for that time period, I guess, if that makes any sense. So there's that. And that's, like I said, not a bad movie. It's just not really my cup of tea. 94. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 96, which is, okay, around this time. This was right after, or a few years after, the big Pulp Fiction, you know, film noir, Quentin Tarantino hard-on craze took place, and, you know, Clerks was out after this, and Pulp Fiction, and, you know, indie films could do absolutely no wrong, and there's a different style to these films, and you get this, From Dusk Till Dawn, which wasn't directed by Tarantino, but it was directed by like his one of his hanger-ons, I guess. And I like Robert Rodriguez, I really do. He directed it, but it's just, the dude is forever interlinked with Tarantino, and I have no idea why, but he just is. And Robert Kurtzman actually wrote the story for this. Robert Kurtzman's a friend of ours on the show, but also a really good effects guy. And, of course, the story is this film was originally supposed to be directed by Kurtzman and starring Joe Pilato, who was Rhodes in Day of the Dead. Instead, it ended up a big Hollywood film with a screenplay by Tarantino and directed by Robert Rodriguez, and starring George Clooney, of all people in the world. And, geez, what to say about this film? Two brothers, played by Tarantino and Clooney. They're called the Gecko Brothers. They're outlaws, and one busts the other out of jail, and they're trying to find a place to hole up, and they have to end up taking some hostages, which is Harvey Keitel, who's like a minister. He was a minister at one time, and his daughter and son, Juliette Lewis, and some other guy that I don't remember his name. And so they take them, and they're going to meet up with a guy and in Mexico at this place called the Titty Twister. I believe that was the name of the club, and it's open from dusk till dawn. And turns out the club is a haven for vampires, and these vampires are weird, like kind of bat. They really look like bats more than anything else, but they're like they CGI meld from humans to bat faces, and these weird kind of faces, like, and some look like snakes. There's the real famous scene where Salma Hayek is doing a striptease, and she turns into a big snake-like Lair of the White Worm looking fucking, you know, vampire. And it's a great movie though, because it has a lot of character actors in it that are like the vampire fighters. I won't say killers, because they turn into vampires eventually, but you got Tom Savini, you got who else was in it? Tom Savini, the Hammer was in it. not MC Hammer, but Fred Williamson, the Hammer. Cheech Marin's in it. Just some really good character actors, and Harvey Keitel does a great job. Really, as does George Clooney. Considering he kind of changes midstream from being like an out of control loner to pulling the group together towards the end of the film, and I really like that film. Really like that because of his performance. Really. See how many I can get through here real quickly. So that was 96, and the most notable one to me after that comes out in 98, and of course is based off a comic book which I actually did read at one time. I was pretty much into comic books during the early 90s, and this was Blade, which is Wesley Snipes. It's weird because he's not really a vampire. He's half man, half vampire, and he's trained or trains himself to kill vampires because his mother was bitten by a vampire, and as she was dying she gave birth to him, and so he's like half man, half. So he doesn't have the hang-ups of most normal vampires. He can go out in the daylight and different stuff like that. And the cool thing about this was I didn't like Deacon Frost. I didn't like Stephen Dorff in this movie, but I did really like Chris Christopherson, who kind of plays like his mentor in the film. But this was one of the first vampire films that it blended action film, like a martial arts action film, into a vampire film. So you had like, it was like Passenger 57 with fucking vampires or something. That's basically what it was. Like Wesley Snipes has a sword and he's like a ninja and he's taking on the vampires and he's the good guy you can root for. Great special effects and really good action fight sequences throughout this film. It was kind of like a beat 'em up vampire film though. You could have put anybody in that really. So that's what I say. Like they just take other genres and other things that are popular at the time. They mix them in with vampires for whatever reason. But there's a comic book. So that's 98. And the next really big thing, it's going to be ending up being a 4-part video. So I'm going to stop it here. So because we're getting ready to move into a new decade, so we'll pick it up from there.